One proximate factor to consider in understanding animal behavior is the animal's brain, or more broadly, its nervous system. The nervous system is in charge of receiving information about the world, filtering that information, and directing the rest of the body to respond to that information. Let's look at those 3 steps in more detail. This pigeon uses its nervous system to respond to events like potential predator attacks. So if the pigeon sees a predator, it can fly away. That happens in 3 steps. The first thing the nervous system does is input sensory information. Light reflects off this cat and reaches the pigeon's eye, where sensory neurons take in that information. The information passes from sensory neurons to interneurons and reaches the central nervous system, which composes the brain and spinal cord. This process is called integration because the brain is processing this new information, there's a cat, with information it already has, like the fact that cats are a threat. After integration, the brain makes use of this information by signaling for some sort of motor output. This information moves through a nerve, out to the motor neurons, and then to the muscles. The pigeon flies away. Scientists who study behavior can investigate the proximate mechanisms in the nervous system that drive behavior by asking questions like, how does the brain detect sensory input? How does the brain interpret information? And how does the brain get the body to take actions in response to information? Of course, that information has to actually take some sort of shape in the brain. When I say information, I'm actually talking about electricity, moving through the brain and body in a series of action potentials. Let me explain that. The cells that make up the nervous system are called neurons. Neurons are shaped like this pink thing, more or less. The central area is the cell body, and it has the nucleus and all of the organelles you'd expect from a typical cell. It has these short branches called dendrites, which connect to other neurons and receive information from them. The neuron also has this long branch called an axon, which allows it to send information out to other cells. The point of connection between 2 cells is called a synapse. When the neuron is activated, it builds up an electric charge. If that charge reaches a certain intensity, it triggers a movement of ions, which are charged particles, down through the axon of the cell. This process is called an action potential. The ions reach the synapse where they trigger the release of neurotransmitters. There are several kinds of neurotransmitters, and their function is either to excite an action potential in the next cell or inhibit the action potential in the next cell. And of course, there are many of these neurons in the brain and nerves, allowing animals to send information through all sorts of different neuron pathways, communicating all sorts of different things. Some of the more cognitively simple behavior is behavior that's innate. Animals are born with innate behaviors, which are determined by their genes and by the environment in which they develop. Another term for an innate behavior is an instinct, which more specifically is a pattern of behavior that an animal can do completely the first time they try to do it. The animal doesn't need to learn how to perform an instinctive behavior. One innate behavior of this gull chick is to tap its parent's beak for food. Adult gulls have a bright red spot on their beak, and this functions as a stimulus, also called a releaser, for the gull's pecking behavior. The spot is called a releaser because when the baby gull sees it, the sight of the spot triggers what's called an innate releasing mechanism in the gull's brain. The innate releasing mechanism is a network of neurons responsible for detecting the cue, the red spot, that acts as a releaser. These neurons drive the baby gull to peck on the spot. This action is called a fixed action pattern, which is a set of movements that are pre-programmed into an animal and drive them to react to the stimulus in an adaptive way. So, the baby gull brain can manage behaviors that are important for survival. It can detect sensory information, process it, and complete an action. But it turns out that it's not enough to just detect sensory information, because there's a lot of sensory information out there, and not all of it is valuable to detect. So our baby gull should probably react if it sees its parent, or if it sees a predator. But it can safely ignore the wind, at least until it learns to fly. And it can safely ignore random things in its environment, at least until it learns to associate those things with humans and their food. So the baby gull nervous system needs to have command centers, which are parts of the brain that communicate with one another about competing stimuli. And those command centers need to be capable of turning neurological responses in the environment on or off. This process is called stimulus filtering, which is the ability of neurons to ignore some information and to focus on biologically relevant things. So now that we've discussed how an animal brain perceives its environment, In the future, we can explore why animals evolve to be particularly good at sensing particular lights, sounds, colors, shapes, scents, and other sensations.